On the quiet morning of March 19th, 2026, the global public woke up to the news that Chuck Norris had passed away. He died in a private, highly secured hospital facility in Hawaii at the age of 86. In that physical hospital room, there was absolute silence. There was a grieving family, a dedicated medical staff, and a fragile elderly man who had simply reached the natural, biological end of his human journey. But immediately outside those hospital walls, the entire global internet infrastructure exploded. Across every single social media platform, millions of people began rapidly sharing his image. They posted endless digital tributes, declaring that death itself must have been afraid to approach him. They repeated the exact same digital mythology that has echoed across the internet for over 2 decades. They confidently proclaimed that Chuck Norris did not die, but simply allowed the universe to exist without him. It is a massive, highly coordinated global phenomenon. To the untrained eye, it looks like the ultimate beautiful tribute to a beloved cultural icon. But I want you to look closely at this massive digital mourning. I want you to completely erase the glamorous, indestructible, highly manufactured image from your mind. The terrifying truth is that the global masses are not mourning the death of a human being. They are mourning the loss of a digital monument that they built themselves. The internet is not crying for an 86-year-old man who took his final, fragile breath surrounded by his grieving family. They are desperately trying to protect a massive collective delusion. Chuck Norris, the dedicated martial artist, the military veteran, the philanthropist, the father, and the man of flesh and blood, was systematically erased by the internet many years ago. Today, we look past the internet mythology. We expose the predatory nature of digital caricatures, the dark sociology of public worship, the terrifying phenomenon of performative participation, and an industrial complex that forces a mortal man to become a god, simply because society is terrified of the dark. But before we can understand exactly how the internet destroyed his humanity, we must deeply honor the magnificent, profoundly decent human being who actually existed before the memes took over. Welcome to Post-Credit. If you want to understand the true legacy of this man, you have to completely forget the action movies, the roundhouse kicks, and the viral internet jokes. You have to look at a young, incredibly shy boy named Carlos Ray Norris. He was not born a warrior. He was born into profound hardship in Oklahoma in the year 1940. He grew up in deep, suffocating poverty. He was not naturally athletic. He was deeply introverted, severely bullied by his peers, and carried the heavy, agonizing emotional burden of watching his father struggle with severe alcoholism. He was a quiet, frightened kid who desperately just wanted to feel safe in a chaotic, unpredictable world. When he joined the United States Air Force and was deployed to South Korea as an air policeman, he discovered martial arts. But he did not study fighting to hurt people or to project dominance. He studied it to build the internal psychological armor that he severely lacked as a terrified child. He spent decades engaged in grueling, painful, bone-breaking physical training. He bled on the mats. He suffered severe injuries. He eventually created his entirely own martial arts discipline called Chun Kuk Do. The fundamental core of his personal philosophy was never about violence. It was built entirely on inner peace, intense personal discipline, and the strict, absolute avoidance of unnecessary conflict. And perhaps the greatest, most fiercely protected secret of his entire life was his heart for children. While the modern world was busy making up ridiculous stories about his superhuman strength and his appetite for destruction, the real man was quietly, passionately running a massive charitable foundation called Kickstart Kids. For decades, long after the Hollywood cameras stopped rolling, he poured his own heart, his own time, and his own massive wealth into helping at-risk youth in public middle schools. He took thousands of marginalized, bullied, and forgotten teenagers off the dangerous streets. He gave them a safe place. He gave them discipline, respect, and a community. He literally saved thousands of fragile human lives, not by firing a machine gun on a movie set, but by showing up in real life and telling broken kids that they actually mattered. He was a human being who built a beautiful, enduring life through relentless human empathy. But the entertainment industry is not a dream factory. It is an industrial meat grinder. And in the early 2000s, a new, far more insidious machine was built. The internet was evolving into a highly organized, ruthlessly efficient psychological institution. It was meticulously designing algorithms to mass-produce, control, and commodify cultural icons for public consumption. The early internet did not want complex, multi-dimensional human beings. It did not want a deeply empathetic philanthropist. It wanted an easily digestible, two-dimensional archetype. When the digital machine locked its sights on him, they systematically packaged his identity. They labeled him the ultimate invincible force of nature. The internet created a highly organized, viral phenomenon. They fabricated millions of exaggerated, impossible statements about his physical power. They claimed he could divide by zero. They claimed he could hear sign language. They claimed he was the physical embodiment of absolute, biological perfection. They completely ignored his actual philosophy of peace. They entirely erased his massive charitable work with children, and they actively transformed him into a cartoon character of mindless, unstoppable violence. They placed a permanent, scanning barcode on his identity. Every single time his name was typed into a search engine, it generated massive digital traffic and massive advertising revenue for technology corporations. The unwritten, ironclad contract of the digital machine was absolute. Surrender your true, authentic identity, permanently dismantle your personal boundaries, and we will give you a terrifying, suffocating level of global, immortal worship. Imagine a human being who has spent his entire life mastering a physical art form, studying philosophy, saving the lives of children, and raising a family. Now imagine that modern society looks at that entire, complex lifetime of profound human achievement and completely erases it. They actively overwrite decades of authentic human existence. They replace the breathing man with a cartoon. They replace a lifetime of discipline and charity with a fabricated, highly repetitive joke. The man who existed in physical reality was fundamentally overwritten by the digital caricature. His actual life, his actual struggles, his quiet moments of doubt, and his actual mortality became entirely irrelevant to the masses. He was made entirely unmarketable as a normal, fragile human being. It was a silent, devastating replacement of a living soul with a highly profitable digital ghost. And then, the machine executed the most cruel and terrifying psychological tactic of all. They forced him to participate in his own erasure. In clinical psychology, there is a dark concept known as performative participation. It happens when a hostage is forced to smile and agree with their captors to ensure their own survival. When the digital mythology reached its absolute peak, the mainstream media demanded his presence. Chuck Norris was invited onto late-night television shows. He was handed a script. He was placed in front of millions of viewers, and he was explicitly asked to read the fake, fabricated internet jokes about himself aloud. He was forced to sit in a chair, smile at the camera, and actively participate in the destruction of his own authentic legacy. He had to pretend to enjoy the fact that his entire life's work of helping bullied children had been completely overshadowed by a punchline about a roundhouse kick. If he showed anger, the media would label him bitter. If he showed sadness, the media would label him weak. His only option was to smile, nod, and help the machine tighten the digital chains around his own neck. The machine can only execute its cruelty because we, the viewing audience, provide the perfect, absolute cover. We must confront our own dark complicity and the deeply uncomfortable sociology of the internet. Whenever candid photographs emerged of Chuck Norris simply living his life, growing older, or showing the natural, inevitable signs of physical aging, the internet immediately weaponized his image. Millions of ordinary people transformed his very existence into a viral, easily consumable digital product. They romanticized his supposed invincibility. They edited his image into stylized, absurd, action-packed scenarios. They labeled him a god among men, fundamentally misunderstanding the terrifying, isolating burden of being stripped of your fundamental right to be human. This is the ultimate, terrifying irony of modern society. We applaud an actor for perfectly simulating strength on a television screen, but when that exact same man becomes a senior citizen, when he faces the genuine, raw fragility of the human body, we actively refuse to acknowledge it. We force him back into the digital cage. We turn his entire legacy into a shallow punchline for bored people mindlessly browsing their phones during their morning commute. Our collective apathy acts as a massive, impenetrable shield for the digital industry. By turning his identity into a joke, we give the cultural machine absolute permission to keep harvesting his image indefinitely. But why did the internet do this? The psychological reality of this phenomenon did not begin with a martial arts movie. It did not begin with a television show about a Texas Ranger. It began with a profound, terrifying psychological disease that infects the entire modern world. The absolute, paralyzing, existential fear of human mortality. You have to look at the exact timeline of when this digital mythology was created. The phenomenon exploded in the early to mid-2000s. This was a specific era defined by intense global instability. It was the immediate aftermath of massive terrorist attacks. It was the chaos of endless overseas wars. It was a constant, suffocating cycle of 24-hour breaking news showcasing human destruction, financial collapse, and global panic. Why did millions of young people, sitting safely behind computer screens, suddenly decide to create a digital god of absolute invincibility during that specific time period? They were not just bored. They were deeply, fundamentally terrified. We live in a chaotic, unpredictable, and highly dangerous world. We are constantly surrounded by the horrifying reality of terminal disease, sudden violence, and the absolute, inescapable certainty of our own death. The human brain cannot constantly process that level of intense existential dread without eventually collapsing under the pressure. The creation of the invincible Chuck Norris was not a comedy routine. It was a massive, collective psychological defense mechanism. The global public desperately needed to believe that somewhere, somehow, absolute strength still existed. They needed an avatar of invincibility to project their own intense fears onto. By obsessively, relentlessly repeating the digital mantra that Chuck Norris could not be killed, the internet was desperately trying to convince itself that death could be defeated. They demanded that he carry the heavy, mathematically impossible burden of immortality. They forced a mortal actor to become the psychological shield for an entire generation that was terrified of the dark. They synthesized their own profound fear of biological weakness, their own panic about the aging process, and their own devastating fear of sudden death. And they built an impenetrable digital fortress around a single, unsuspecting actor to hide from those exact fears. The internet did not elevate Chuck Norris. The internet simply used him as a multi-billion-dollar extraction point for our unresolved existential terror. This terrifying psychological extraction is not an isolated incident. It is a highly systemic, perfectly calculated cultural epidemic. Look at the bodies left behind by the digital and cinematic systems. Think of Keanu Reeves, forced by the internet to become the ultimate symbol of tragic, saintly perfection, entirely stripped of his right to just be a flawed, normal human being. Think of Heath Ledger, pushed to the absolute breaking point, completely denied rest, while his exhaustion was commodified and his death romanticized to sell movie tickets. Think of Cillian Murphy, forced to offer his own mind as an empty vessel for a ghost, while the internet aggressively misremembered his character and turned severe trauma into a false monument of cold masculinity. The internet actively seeks out individuals who carry a specific cultural weight. It isolates them, surrounds them with an impenetrable wall of viral jokes and digital expectations, removes their connection to normal reality, and demands that they remain permanently frozen in time for our daily amusement. And when the psychic toll becomes reality, when the actor inevitably ages, when the human body finally surrenders to the crushing, inescapable weight of biological time, the digital machine simply ignores the physical reality. They issue a highly polished digital tribute. They post the exact same fabricated statements they posted 20 years ago. They stubbornly refuse to acknowledge the human tragedy of death, the quiet moments of grief experienced by his actual family, and the fragile nature of the human heart. And they immediately begin searching for the next vulnerable avatar to carry their fears. It brings us to a terrifying philosophical paradox. In the late 20th century, the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard warned humanity about a concept known as the simulacra. He stated that modern society would eventually create artificial copies of reality that are so highly saturated and so incredibly convincing that the original reality would be completely forgotten and entirely replaced by the fake copy. If a multi-billion-dollar digital industry slowly replaces every single piece of a man's genuine human legacy with a manufactured, highly profitable internet caricature. If they extract every authentic achievement, every drop of real sweat, and every ounce of human discipline, and replace it with a shallow punchline, is he still the same man? When the breaking news of his passing echoed across the world on March 19, 2026, the internet did not mourn the fragile elderly man who took his last breath in a quiet hospital bed. They mourned the simulacra. They mourned the copy. They mourned the digital shield they used to hide from their own mortality. But as the digital noise finally begins to fade, we are left with the quiet, beautiful truth of who Carlos Ray Norris actually was. He did not possess superhuman strength. He could not stop a bullet with his bare hands. He was just a man. A man who grew up scared, who learned how to fight so he wouldn't have to be afraid anymore, and who spent the rest of his long life teaching bullied children how to find their own courage. He did not need to be an immortal god to be a true hero. His genuine, flawed, compassionate human life was far more magnificent than any viral internet joke could ever capture. The greatest tragedy is that it took his physical death for us to finally stop laughing at the meme and start respecting the man. When you systematically strip a human being of their fundamental mortality to soothe your own psychological fears, and you hand the world back a fake digital idol, who is the actual victim? Is it the man, forced to watch his entire life's work be reduced to a string of digital jokes, having his genuine humanity completely erased to satisfy the internet's twisted vision? Or is it the millions of spectators, sitting alone in the dark, staring blankly at their glowing screens, willfully ignoring the absolute certainty of their own approaching death and wildly applauding a ghost? Unlock your thoughts in the comment section below. If this deep dive made you question the reality you have been comfortably sold by the media, hit that like button and subscribe to post-credit. We will continue to pull back the heavy curtain on the illusions they sell you long after the screen fades to black. Goodbye, and always question the memory of the masses.